Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm hoping you can see me. It's Clancy Harrison here. We are excited to kick off the Food Rescue Conference. We are going to be talking about creating just food rescue operations, common pitfalls, and how to avoid them. We were going to have 3 panelists today, but we are sorry that only one will be here, but it's going to be a very special next 50 minutes because we have Faiza Venzant, who is going to really dive deep into this. So she's going to give a presentation and then we're going to have a discussion. So please make sure that you have your questions and your comments coming in so we can include you in the dialogue. But Faiza, will you go ahead and introduce yourself because you can do it better than I can.
Yeah, Clancy, thank you so much. My name is Faiza Venzant. I'm joining you from Southern California, Temecula, and it's great to be here this morning and to be learning with all of you. I'm the executive director for the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration. We're an international certifying body. We support leaders of volunteers all over the world through an international credential that we offer. So I'm here today sort of to talk about my perspective on how we can understand some of the problematic roots of volunteerism and moving forward with compassion when we're partnering with volunteers.
Thank you so much. And Patience, I'm so excited you were able to join us. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Patience.
Hi, Patience Kabwasa. I'm the executive director of Food to Power in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And we started out as Colorado Springs Food Rescue, have evolved to Food to Power the last 6 years. And we have an urban farm. And on our urban farm, we have programs in food access, so no-cost grocery program that is sourced by food recovery and supplemented by some things that we grow on the farm. Low-cost market that's piloted or SNAP-supported education program. So we have a youth internship where high school students are learning about, seed time and harvest, how to organize in their community using food as a vehicle. We have adult workshops that happen 2 times a month and a production farm. We're actively growing on 1.5 acres. And we have a food scrap member pickup service. So we pick up food scraps and then turn it into compost to support our farm. So we're working to kind of affect the food system in an urban environment, but particularly like from all aspects, but particularly for communities that have traditionally been marginalized, BIPOC, and are experiencing higher rates of food insecurity.
Thank you so much, Patience. We are going to go to Faiza because I know she has some slides that she's going to share with us, and then we'll kick it back to you, Patience, with some questions, and we'll start the dialogue.
All right, so just bear with me while I try to figure out sharing my screen. And maybe Clancy, I can't see you anymore, but maybe you could tell me if you could see my screen.
I cannot see your screen. I still see everyone here.
All right, give me a second here.
So, Patience, while she gets set up, why don't I ask you a question? Since this is about the common pitfalls, why don't you kick us off with what is the biggest pitfall you have seen within your organizations?
The biggest pitfall. Well, I think there is a difference between the anti-hunger movement and the food justice movement, I think, straight off the bat. But I also, I think in answering that pitfall or working towards reducing why people are in the free food line in the first place, it's a both and approach, right? Because people are showing up every single day to grocery programs or food banks to access food, but that number is only growing. It's not really addressing why folks are in the free food line in the first place. And so working on those intersections of housing, income, education, transportation that really are effective or intersectional, and why people are going to or making their food choices last are just as important as that emergency food assistance. So I think finding a way to kind of straddle both of those in the work that we do, and being able to not only mobilize the people in our work doing the work, or like people that are most affected, but how do we also mobilize philanthropy around this, because this looks like, really affecting the economy and being an economic driver in the communities that we work in. Like, how to fundraise for that is the, and I wouldn't call it a pitfall. It's just like the work that we have to do, and it can be exhausting, and it can, just have lots of pieces moving at the same time. And it's movement work, right? And so it just, there's no one like answer that fits all things. It's really, I think, building power and working in coalition with just other folks who are doing similar work.
Patience, I want to pull something out that you said, and I think it's really important that we all hear this, and maybe Faiza, and you can go a little bit deeper. But one of the things that I think is extremely important is that separation, going deeper. Maybe separation is the wrong word, but going deeper into hunger relief, and how do we actually help the people and serve the people who we're working with, not necessarily helping. And I love that you're changing it more from a lens of how do we have workforce development, if I'm hearing that right. How do we just create a different path versus hunger relief? And with our nonprofit locally, that's the one thing. How do we separate ourselves from big hunger and look at economic development, workforce development, investing in our regional food supply chain, putting people as the people that we're working with as leaders in the systems? So it sounds like I was getting that from you. And I just want to make sure people hear that, and that I heard that right.
You did. And that's the challenge, right? Like, if the folks who are most affected are the folks who are also closest to the solution and working towards a solution, then it's kind, I mean, in a sense, it's like dismantling the structure that we're used to as far as just charity, or I'm up here serving you and, let me help you. But that takes resource as well. And so just like figuring out how to do that sustainably, I think also in our line of work, when we're really reliant on food rescue or food recovery programs, we're beholden to the farmers markets, grocery stores, folks that we partner with, to source us their donations in order to be able to feed our communities. And the problem with that is, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a problem. I mean, we're grateful for it. It's just that, the number of folks who need to access our program continues to grow, and those donations don't always follow. If they get captured by another food bank, then we're having to reorganize and think about like how we continue to feed our community with less. So I think that, again, people who are most affected are closest to the solution, and figuring out how it's really participatory and kind of linear is part of that challenge.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I firmly believe that the solutions live in the hearts, minds, and souls of the people that we're working with. And I love that you talked about volunteerism. And so I think that's a great segue to get Faiza started on what she's going to talk about. And then we'll come back to you, Patience, especially, and get your input on what she's going to share with us.
So I'm nodding a lot over here, because I am in total agreement with so much of what you said, Patience and Clancy. And I think there's two things at play here. One is that our proximity to the communities that we serve isn't the best. And it's not just when it comes to food rescue or food insecurity. It's in the charitable sector in general. It's the way the charitable sector has been set up. We're not set up we aren't set up to be in proximity with the communities that we partner with, and it does come down to individual hearts and minds. And I think that's a place where we need to start. I sort of want to start by saying I'm not an expert when it comes to equity. This is something that I'm still learning, and growing up in North America, I think we can't have these discussions without recognizing characteristics of white supremacy culture. And I'm a woman, I'm a person of color, and I have internalized many characteristics of white supremacy culture, which I'm still working towards unlearning. And so when I enter into this work, I'm assuming good intentions. And I just also want to say that, for anyone who wants to continue any of these discussions after today, my door is still open. I want to talk a little bit about what is a culture and challenge all of us to think about what we think the culture is of the organizations that we work within, and what we hope the culture is, and what we hope others perceive the culture to be, because there can be a huge disconnect. Tema Okun, who's done some amazing work around naming characteristics of white supremacy culture, and also helping us to understand how we can dismantle those characteristics, has this incredible quote: "Culture is powerful precisely because it's so present, and at the same time so very difficult to name or identify." The characteristics that are going to be listed on the next slide are damaging because they're used as norms and standards, and they're done without being proactively named or chosen by the group. And when we think about who the group is, it's the staff, the volunteers, the donors, the community that is accessing our services because they don't have a choice and they need to. We have resources, and we gatekeep those resources, whether it's food, whether it's access to the volunteers and their time. That's the group. And oftentimes that whole group has not had a chance to choose and name the norms of that culture. Just to continue, they are damaging because they promote white supremacy thinking. And you don't need to be white to have white supremacy thinking. And I think that's something that we also need to name as well. They're damaging to both people of color and to white people. Organizations that are people of color led, like mine, or majority people of color, can also demonstrate many damaging characteristics of white supremacy culture. So Tema Okun goes on to talk about what those characteristics of white supremacy culture are. We don't have enough time to go into that. That's like a whole day of learning that we can do. But there's three that I've highlighted here: quantity over quality, individualism, and paternalism. And I'd love to just talk a little bit about how those things show up in volunteerism. You might recognize that these are some of the things that you might be doing where you work or where you partner with volunteers and community. But then I want to go a little bit further to talk about, like, how do we disrupt that? What can we do a little bit differently? How does that sound, Clancy?
I think it sounds great.
All right, so let's get started. So when we think about quantity over quality, what we're thinking about here is it's when we measure things, right? So how this shows up in volunteerism, for example, and this can easily apply as well to how we steward donors, or how we think about community. We focus and we measure things like the number of volunteers. We focus and measure things like the number of volunteer hours, right? We think about the quantity, but we don't think about the outputs. What are those volunteers doing? So we can say we had 1,000 volunteers. They gifted us 10,000 hours of time. But does that mean that they were great? That they all showed up on time? That they did great work? Was it meaningful when they were here? We focus more on those measurements and not on the impact that those volunteers may have had on the work that we do and on the community that we serve. So what we do then is, in order of importance, we center our organization first, like look at what we were able to do, look at who we were able to attract. We do the same with donors. We were able to raise X amount of money. Then we center the volunteers. And the last group of people that we center is the community that we served, when in fact it should be opposite. That's who we should be highlighting in everything that we do, when we talk to volunteers, when we talk to donors, when we talk about the work that we do. The other thing that we do is we attribute a financial value to what volunteers contribute. So, every year the independent sector comes out with a dollar amount that they say that, every volunteer hour is worth X amount of dollars. And we attribute that financial value. And then we say to our donors and to our community, we had 10,000 volunteers. That was the equivalent of, I don't know, $30,000 or $300,000 worth of time. That's the equivalent of like 6 full-time staff. And the reality is, if a donor was to give us $300,000 tomorrow and say, stop involving volunteers, we wouldn't. We couldn't do what those volunteers do with that money. So we make that comparison as well, and that's that focusing on quantity over quality, which is a characteristic of white supremacy culture. We also, pat ourselves on the back for doing more with less, right? And we talk about how little it takes to make an impact. And sometimes we lead with that, for just this much a day, this is what you can do. And we encourage that. And again, we focus on that quantity over like what your time, what your donation, what your funds, your resources can do. The other thing that we do when we focus on quantity over quality is that we don't value inputs like community development, relationship building, the satisfaction of our volunteers, what their wellness score is prior to volunteering, during, and after, or what we've done in terms of challenging volunteer reflections, right? So we say we had 1,000 volunteers, they gave us 10,000 hours, but we don't talk about the fact that we actually have to connect with 5,000 people in our community to have that convert into 1,000 volunteers. Of those 5,000, we have to interview maybe 2,000 of them to make sure that they and that's how we arrive at our 1,000 volunteers. We don't talk about everything that goes into all of the process that goes into those outcomes. And so that process is where a lot of meaningful work is happening, where we are seeing a lot of that proximity that I talked about as well. That's being important. So that's how quantity over quality is showing up in terms of volunteerism. So how do we disrupt that, right? So our challenge is, how do we define quality in a different way, and how do we measure and value inputs that don't have a number, right? And so one of the things I challenge people to do is I ask them, like, what goals and deliverables do you have that don't include a number, and that are meaningful and that align with your organizational values, right? So, and when you're thinking about your strategic plans, when you're thinking about how you're going to evaluate your progress and your outcomes, how do your goals relate to your organizational values? Do you know if you're being true to them? And what accountability is there, right? So what if you have 1,000 volunteers? Did that also meet and connect with your goals for inclusion, for respect, those kinds of things? So I have an example here, like one of my clients is Volunteer Ireland. They have 4 values: inclusion, respect, integrity, and courage. And everything that they do in their planning, when it comes to involving volunteers in their work, has to relate back to those 4 things, right? So how do you animate your organizational values that in a way that doesn't include numbers and doesn't focus on quantity? And it's hard for us to do because we work, all of us, and operate in a society that values data and that values numbers, and we don't question what's behind those numbers. And I'm challenging us to question what's behind those numbers and actually illuminate some of the great work that's happening behind what those numbers are. I think the other thing that you need to do to disrupt this idea of quantity over quality is you have to center the community that you serve in the work that you do. And you need to see the community that you serve from an asset-based perspective, not from what they don't have and not from what they need, but what assets they are brimming with, and then how the work that you do enhances or adds to their quality of life. We have to drop the pity when we talk about the communities that we serve. We cannot expect people, we cannot expect to be diverse and be inclusive and talk the talk of equity when we use pity in how we talk about the community that we serve. It's not going to breed equitable and diverse environments. We also have to find ways for the volunteers that we do involve in our work to challenge their biases, reflect on the impact that they're making, right? So if we have volunteers that are I'll say regular volunteers that we are in touch with on a weekly basis, or that we see repetitively, we need to build in those moments for them to talk to us about what did they think their experience was going to be like, what were their ideas or beliefs around poverty, around food insecurity, food rescue, whatever the mission of your organization is, and how has volunteering challenged those biases or affirmed them. And then we need to sort of listen to that and ask ourselves, are we providing experiences that are perpetuating, harmful attitudes around what our clients, our community that we serve are already facing, or are we building opportunities where we are putting community members in proximity with those that we serve, and they're challenging our biases, which means it's going to affect how they vote, how they donate, how they move through their community, and they talk about the work that they do. That's actually affecting real change versus just saying, thank you for your 10 hours this week, for example. For those of you who work with large groups of volunteers, for example, who may come in and do that episodically, again, building in some education and some opportunity to reflect for those volunteers at the beginning of their day, maybe at different points of their day or at the end of the day, where they can reflect on what they learned, the work that they did, and what impact they feel they may have had today, and what impact they could have going forward as it relates to your mission. And I want to say, one of the things that we do is we talk about the number of hours we have, or, when it comes to volunteers, having the most hours doesn't actually mean that anybody performed those hours well or made any impact on the community being served. So if that's if you're leading volunteers and you're trying to get a seat at the table, you're trying to illuminate their stories, if that's the only metric that you're talking about, it's not going to get you where you need to be. You need to be able to tell some stories about what's happening, what do those hours actually mean, and what impact is happening. The next thing I want to talk about is individualism. And individualism shows up in volunteerism when we do things like we focus on individual contributions instead of community impact, right? And we have to be really honest about who can achieve those awards, right? So if we have awards for volunteers around the number of hours that they served or their years of service, who can actually achieve that? People who have access to that kind of disposable time to be able to make the decision to volunteer usually are in a position of privilege to be able to do so. And so what you're doing is you're basically rewarding that privilege in a way, right? And there can be people that show up for a day, make it an amazing impact, but we'll never tell their stories and we'll never celebrate them because they don't fit into these models of recognition that we have. We also, in the not-for-profit and charitable sector, are notorious for naming things. We name trees and benches and doorways and rooms and hallways. We name anything that we can put a name on, right? For donors, for volunteers. And again, usually what we're doing is we're recognizing a contribution, whether it's financial, whether it's time. And we have to remember that those people that we are recognizing, often we're recognizing them for having access to a volunteer role. And when we think about who has access and how diverse that group is, who is it that we are putting up on a pedestal and that we are rewarding on an individual level. I also want to point out that individualism and that this idea of giving, I come from a Muslim background where giving and donating your time is something that you do anonymously. And so I'll give you an example of a place where I worked where we had two volunteers named Miriam. One was Muslim and one was Jewish. We were recognizing both of them for some incredible volunteer impact and work that they had. Miriam, who was of the Jewish faith, we had decided we were going to name a bench on the rooftop of our building, our rooftop garden, after the two of them. Miriam, who was of Jewish descent, who had family members who were Holocaust survivors. When we told her about this, she wept. Her ability to access her family's history through documents and through records it was severely impeded by the fact that her family members were in concentration camps. So for her to be able to see her family's name on a bench, it meant so much to her. She was going to invite all of her family to the event, and she just cried at it, and it meant so much to her. And Miriam, who was of Muslim descent, was visibly uncomfortable when we told her about this, and we weren't sure. We followed up with her later, and she talked to us about the fact that I don't do this so that you can recognize me. Like, this is something that I do because it's an expression of my faith. It's a way of life. And she was really offended by the fact that we were going to put her name on a bench. And to me, I grew up Muslim. Like, obviously, I felt terrible because obviously I know that. And growing up in this and working through organizations where we have these naming conventions, it kind of felt like it's natural, like let's do that. And it didn't stop to think about that it could be culturally insensitive in cultures where giving is anonymous. So that's kind of how it shows up. And and I think to myself, the second Miriam, when she's looking for volunteer opportunities and she comes across a website that talks about, that has like our volunteers are superheroes and they name them and they talk about them, she's probably not going to be choosing to volunteer her time there. She's selecting herself out. And so when we are trying to create these inclusive, diverse environments, who are we saying, you don't belong here inadvertently and not with any intention, but it's those Miriams, the second Miriam that is looking at how we're welcoming them to say, like, this is not a place for me. This is not where I want to give my time. When we think about individualism as well, how it shows up is we talk about, we focus on competition rather than collaboration. And we also do this right now. A huge way that we're doing this right now is through gamification. So there's tons of apps out there where volunteers can earn badges for the number of hours, for the number of times they log in, for the number of kudoses that they get from staff or other people that they're serving, and we gamify volunteerism. And we have to remember that's cool. We have a generation that's volunteering for us right now, where gamification, the number of likes you get, the instant gratification is important to them. But we have to remember that it can be done in the wrong context. So an organization that I work for had a weekly food bank in the lobby of an apartment building, where those residents had been under-prioritized and had been identified as a hub for this food distribution on a weekly basis. And the way that we were able to get the food out was to have corporate groups of volunteers come, load up all the food and distribute it. And one of the things that the groups, they ended up doing sort of naturally themselves is they would line up in two lines across from each other, and our community members would sort of walk in this like U shape and, hit one line, pick up food, come around and hit the other line and pick up food. These two lines of volunteers started competing with each other, who could serve people the fastest. And it was kind of gross. They were like taking food and like throwing it into bins. They weren't even looking into the eyes of the community members that they were there to serve. They were just more interested in competing with each other. They made a game out of it. And I can only imagine what it must have been like to be a community member coming down into the lobby of your own apartment building where you live, your own home, what's supposed to be a safe place, and having to take food from volunteers who were just having a fun day. It was a day off work for them. They were laughing. They didn't even humanize you in a way that they were getting to know you or talking to you or even asking you, is this something that you want me to put into your box? So that gamification in the wrong context can just further harm the community that you're actually trying to partner with and to walk beside. So how do you interrupt that, right? You have to move from competition to collaboration, right? So if you want to recognize your volunteers, recognize efforts that are done on behalf of a group of people, recognize collaboration, recognize teams versus putting individuals up on a pedestal. Focus on team behaviors that people are exhibiting versus their own, single leadership behaviors. Gamification, I already sort of talked about. Be really intentional about what it is you want your awards to achieve and to say about your values as an organization, right? If you're putting up an award program, does it align with your organization's values, and how? So make those things intentional versus this is what we've always done. We've always had these awards. We've always had this recognition. The other thing that I want to say is, like, all of these characteristics of white supremacy culture, they feed into each other, right? So when we talk about there's this sense of urgency to meet the community needs, that leads to that individualism. We've got to get this done. I'll do it myself. So I center myself, I'll get it done, and I'll get it done faster. I'll get the most done. and that breeds quantity over quality. So all of these characteristics kind of feed into each other and strengthen each other. And so we need to sort of take a look at how we structure our tasks when it comes to involving volunteers and how they play into these characteristics of white supremacy culture. And again, I'll say, and you'll hear me say it a million times today, you have to center the community, the collective, the neighborhood, whoever it is that you are there to serve, over centering the volunteers who are there. It's not the volunteers who deserve the recognition. It's actually the community that deserves recognition, that deserves esteem and our support over the community. And then the last thing I want to talk about is paternalism, right? And paternalism is when we talk about the community that we serve and we talk about all of their deficits, right? And we think about ourselves as the antidote to their struggles, when we're not, right? Even if everyone was to be fed, patients talked about how that's not it. It's also around housing. It's also thinking about their employability. We aren't just the only antidote to helping the communities that we serve. So it shows up in volunteerism, for example, in that we talk about what the volunteers can do for the community that is in need, right? We talk about, we couldn't do it without you. They need you. We use language like that that's very paternalistic. And then again, we place ourselves and our volunteers as the antidote. You can make the difference. You're the solution, right? You're not the solution. Your 2 hours a week of volunteerism is not going to be the solution. It'll help, but it's not going to be a solution to these systems that are at play. And so we need to find a different way to talk about that. We position volunteers as superheroes, and that is also a way that paternalism shows up. And we don't recognize the community for their efforts. We don't center them in the process. And oftentimes, when we have community members, communities that we are serving who are also showing up as volunteers, we're not recognizing that enough, or in ways that are dignified. And we use language like they need you, or we say things that we know what they need. We make decisions for our community. One of the things that we do and that we need to get better at is deciding who is going to volunteer for a community without that community's input. And I challenge people to think about, when you are creating your systems, your application forms, your interview questions, when you're pairing volunteers up where they will be in proximity with community members, who has decided who those volunteers are going to be? Have your community members had a say in who's going to partner with them? I'm a parent of an amazing 6-year-old boy who was born when I was 27 weeks pregnant. And so our family spent 3 months in the NICU. And I clearly remember a volunteer, when you're in the NICU, you're trying to have your baby gain weight and you just want to get home. And so I remember one day in the NICU, just trying to breastfeed my child, just trying to get it right. I'm tired. I'm stressed out. I have another child at home. I'm just trying to get it right. And all of a sudden, this young volunteer bounds over to me and is like, "Hi, can I help you?" She startled me. She startled my baby. He started to cry. She ruined the whole rhythm we had going. That was going to take like another hour to get going. My baby is even more hungry now because it's going to take us so much longer to be able to get him fed. And I snapped and I was like, "No, thank you." And she went back to the nurse's station, complained about me, and nurse came over and was like, "You were really rude to that volunteer." And keep in mind, I've been leading volunteers for almost 25 years now. And I said to her, like, "I'm not here to make that volunteer feel good about being here. That volunteer is supposed to be here to support me." By her doing that, that wasn't supportive. The next day I had another nurse, come in. In hindsight, I could have handled that differently, but in the moment, it was just basically further harming me. Like, that volunteer was supposed to be there to serve me and my family and to help me, but it further harmed us, right? The next day, I had another volunteer who was a former NICU nurse who was retired, who came back to volunteer in the NICU. She would go to the nurse's station and she would make eye contact with every single one of the parents that was there and just wave. And that was her way of telling us, "I'm here. When you need me, I'm here." And that is, when you have community members, and when we talk about what that proximity is and how important lived experience is, the difference between those two volunteers is one had lived experiences with the NICU community and what families were going through. She could provide a service to me that didn't further harm me, that actually empowered me and made me feel uplifted and made me feel supported, versus the other volunteer who had obviously been given very little training about the culture of a NICU and what parents are going through, and didn't have that lived experience and was there for her own, idealism, and was like, how can I help you? It was about her. It wasn't about me. And so, when you're recruiting volunteers, how many of us are asking our community members, take a look at take a look at our information on our website. Does it paint you in a way that makes you feel good about yourself? When we're interviewing volunteers, are we asking the right questions to get the right people to be supporting you? So we have to drop language like, we couldn't do it without you when we talk about volunteers. We have to stop talking about the community, about things like they have nothing or they need you. Stop using things like fear and guilt and saviorism as ways to recruit people, and also stop using those things as ways to recognize people and the contributions that they make. I think one of the number one things that you can do is to place value on lived experience in your position descriptions. And if you are welcoming people with lived experience into your organization, take a look at all your materials, take a look at your communications. Does it make someone with lived experience feel like they belong, like their lived experience is valued, or does it make them feel like you're taking pity on them? If you're trying to diversify your volunteer base, think about the messages that they're receiving that may make them feel like this isn't a place for them. What are you inadvertently doing? And I'm not saying that anyone is trying to do this. What are you inadvertently doing that could be turning people away? So once again, involve the community you serve in all areas of your strategy and planning. For those of us who lead volunteers, we should have a volunteer advisory group. We should have volunteers that work with us, that help us to be better at what we do. And those volunteers should be coming from the community. We also need to, wherever we can, move away from hierarchies, right? We have organizations that have hierarchies in their staff, that have hierarchies in their leadership councils, that have hierarchies on their volunteer boards. And slowly what we're starting to see organizations that have co-chairs, co-presidents, co-CEOs, that have a board where everyone is equal and everyone has the same part to play. People have functions, but there aren't hierarchies. You don't see charts and graphs where there's a bottom and then a top. The last thing that I want to say is that this work, when it comes to equity work, it's not something that we put in a strategic plan and we achieve it in 5 years. Right. This is something that is going to be ongoing forever. We are never going to ever stop this work. We always have to do it, because if we value people if we value people above anything else, we'll understand that this isn't a project that we finish. There isn't an end to it, right? We have to take all the time that's needed to mend fences in our community, to build trust in our community if we don't already have it, build new community connections, and really embody, like, what does allyship mean? And what does allyship mean? It also means shutting down where we see things like paternalism show up. And we say to our community, like, when those things show up, we're going to name it and we're going to stop it and we're going to shut it down. Our community needs to see that happening from us as well. If you need further resources in terms of like learning about how these things show up in volunteerism specifically, but I think they can apply to a lot of the work that we do and our different work functions. Tema Akun's work is available. Brianna Durelis is one of my colleagues that's based out of Atlanta, Georgia, who has a business called Connecting the Cause. She's doing incredible work in terms of the Black experience in volunteerism and, having, and what we can do there. Her focus is on the Black experience, but a lot of what she talks about can be applied to all dimensions of diversity and identity. I'm going to stop there and just sort of say, that all of this starts from a very individual level, and we can be putting together plans, we can be putting together training, we can be telling others what we think that they need to do to build equitable organizations, but it's really up to us as individuals to be doing this work, to commit to it on a daily basis, to be challenging the thoughts that we have, to think about, what are these biases? How do they come into play? How do they affect the decisions that I make? It really needs to start on an individual basis. The other thing that I want to say is we need to question what right we have to be doing the work that we're doing. Do we have proximity to the community that we serve? Do we physically even live in the communities and neighborhoods where we serve, where we're doing the work that we do? That's
important.
Yeah.
So important. Do you mind, because we have 9 minutes left, and I certainly, you gave us so much information that is beautiful, from centering the people that we work with as leaders, quality over quantity, assuming the problem, not assuming the problem, and certainly gamification. Patience, I would love to get your take on any of this, please. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, no, Faiza, incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like just learned so much, and I'm like, my team needs to hear all of this. The other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking is just around the sense of urgency that is also a part of white supremacy culture. So really thinking about this in terms of like, we're going to check all these things off and get it done. In a year. It is perpetual. It is like we should be constantly thinking about this. Equity is not a map coordinate. So it's not like you arrive at a place every time you invite someone to the table, you invite them in their intersections. It adjusts what equity means for your organization internally and externally. And I would say also thinking about the communities that you work with and serve. I think, the dollars and cents of this, like, how are we writing stipends into our operating budget to supplement volunteers' work, like volunteerism, for folks who are not white, and have lots of time, and are retired, are able to donate lots of time. If we're asking someone with lived experience who is juggling a couple of jobs or 3 kids, is a single mom, to show up and volunteer, like, that sacrifice to their life is extraordinary comparatively to the white person who is showing up to your organization who has expendable hours. How are you paying for it? Like, are you giving them gas stipends? Like, how are you including their expertise as valuable as you would any other consultant or person that you pay for that work? I think that is incredibly important. Donor wall. I mean, this makes me think about donor walls. So, obviously we built a hub. It took, between the planning and the fundraising, close to 6 years to be able to do that. And we had to have, lots of contributors in order to make that possible. And so we're thinking about that. We don't have a donor wall currently because it doesn't feel right to, acknowledge someone's $100,000 contribution. What about the single mom who has volunteered, hundreds of thousands of hours over the course of just working with, like, their expertise is just as valuable, or to making the Hillside Hub happen than, the physical donations that we got, or monetary donations that we got, although they were incredibly important. I think another part of thinking about the community in which you serve, like, what is the access point into even employment in your organization? If you're in a historically Black community, like, what does your background check policies look like? Like, how are you thinking about building your policies in the framework of transformational justice, or not necessarily over, like, thinking about the carceral culture, and like, who's affected by the carceral culture. Like, these are all ways, I think, that if we're not intentional about thinking them through, and they're not perfect, and like, we're learning every day, we've struggled through some things. I mean, we recently had just a series of thefts, which affects our day-to-day work, but also we don't want surveillance culture, right? We don't want to come in and we're in your neighborhood, and now we're like, proposing, we're this like resource center up on the hill that is completely excluded from you, right? And so it's like, how do we, like, we need to continue to partner with the community, build relationships. This isn't just happening to us. Actually, this is happening to lots of people on the block. So how do we long-term build even more relationships so that we're talking about this in a collective with the neighborhood of like what it looks like to build policies in helping people, or not helping, but like build policies around just what kind of harm reduction culture we want, right? And like, where do we not just get swept away in what safety is and not really intentionally think about those things. And it is slow going, and like it's slow going and it's not perfect. And I think like being able to also center those two things and like dismantle those as part of like white supremacy culture is also important, because people, depending upon where they are in their journey, can get really frustrated with that, right? And like, based on, you know, the folks in your collective, like that, those are lots of just internal conversations, opportunities for learning. I love what you said, Faiza, about just the opportunity or the learning checkpoints of like, how are we making sure, or like interviewing folks, like, where did you start in this journey? Why did you start to volunteer with us? And then, you know, what have you learned so far? And kind of, so it's not just someone is volunteering for 5 years and they don't have levels of access to other parts of the work that we are doing through food security, I think is incredibly important. So I am going to connect with you sometime after this. Would love to just learn more about the work that you do and how Food to Power can work with you specifically. But yeah, this is, I just, you know, I think it is because we are in the model of feeding people, and that in and of itself, of just how, you know, the roots of that, how it started, like when we think about just access to fresh food, I mean, fundamentally what we're trying to do is just change the perspective that fresh food is a human right? Like it shouldn't matter the neighborhood that you are living in. Your access to fresh food is just like air or water, and it's fundamentally a human right, and it's not perceived that way in our society. We do have these secondary food systems, you know, and I think it's really like we're always conscious also, even in this redistribution model, of the language that we use when recovery instead of the term rescue is problematic, right? Which is why we changed our name from, because what does it look like when you have people underneath the sign, under, you know, your sign that says food rescue? It's horrible, right? It's problematic. We're not rescuing anyone. And how does it feel like making sure that we take the time and effort to like consider how things are packaged, because you certainly don't want people thinking that they're eating trash, right? I think that that's important when we're talking about the communities that we partner with and work with, and you know, just the dignity of it. So thank you so much. This has been an incredible, sorry, my dog is barking in the back.
Both of you. Thank you. We are at the end of our time. So what about 30 seconds each? If you could give at least one tip, one takeaway, one little action that someone listening to can implement today. So it needs to be easy. It needs to be fast. Who wants to go first? One simple action. I know it's putting you on the spot at the last minute.
You start, Clancy. You start.
I will. I think everyone who's listening, including all of us on this panel, we are not the experts. We are not the experts. And as long as food insecurity, hunger, and injustice exist, we need to understand how our misconceptions, our judgments, our projections of our life onto other people actually cause hunger and food injustice. So that's my one thing. How do we uncover our misconceptions to stop? All right.
For me, it would be think about proximity. Okay, so think about proximity and what that means in your life. What is your proximity? If you want to exercise equity in your life, like a muscle, right? Like you would go to the gym. If you had a trainer and you went to the gym, there's no end to your health, right? You would do that always for the rest of your life. You'd always focus on your health. If you think of your commitment to equity in that way, think about communities that you do not have proximity to, and what can you do to build that proximity. I will confess, I have little to zero proximity to the trans community, but the trans community is what I see in my social media feeds. It's top of mind in what media I consume, and I consume that media without proximity. But knowing that, what are the things that I can be doing to build my proximity with that community so that I can actually be an ally if they so choose to call me that, but so that I can actually understand the struggles of that community, understand the strengths of that community, so that if I have a volunteer who is trans, I can serve them in a way that's authentic and from a loving place. Think about all of the communities where you're lacking that proximity, and what can you do to build that, to exercise that.
That's perfect. Patience.
Yeah, I actually am just going to piggyback there. I think that building genuine relationships is so important, right? Proximity, like really, it's really hard to dehumanize someone that you care about and that you have built a relationship with. So what does it look like to build relationships with folks that you might not be, just because of your lived experience, in proximity of, and being intentional about that? And I think how reflecting on what the assets are of like how you think about lived experience. What is your relationship when you're thinking about a person, and we even use that term lived experience? What does that mean, and how do you view that person? Like, or what is your relationship in assessing your assets versus theirs? Is it a mutual relationship where it's like, maybe there's things to learn from my perspective and there's things to learn from that person's perspective, like looking at it from asset based and not deficit based, so that it doesn't feel like you're not in relationship with people because you're pitying them.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. It was amazing to learn from you, and I know you're busy, and we really appreciate your time and coming here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Clancy. Thank you, Patience.
Thank you.
Bye. Everyone else, enjoy the rest of the conference.